A business jet destined for San Diego from Teterboro, New Jersey, just outside of Manhattan, just crashed and killed at least 2 people while setting over 15 homes on fire, potentially splashing jet fuel all the way down Salmon Street, just outside of the Montgomery Gibbs Airport, north of San Diego. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly what we know, what we don't know, and what may have happened, and what could potentially prevent this sort of tragedy from happening again in the future. I'm Meet Kevin. I'm a jet pilot. I fly a very similar plane, a Phenom 300E, compared to the accident aircraft, and I've personally flown in the San Diego region, Montgomery Gibbs, San Diego International, multiple times. So not only does this accident hit at home, but I feel like I could have a bit of a unique perspective. So let's get started with some of the facts and data around the situation, and then we can get into ATC audio to see what the pilot was saying in the moments before the accident. We'll also look at ADS-B data to see, was this pilot on a stable approach? Was this pilot too low? What could have been a factor in the accident? In this video, we'll talk about it all. First, the business jet was a 1991 Cessna Citation 2. That's at least when it was certified. The plane was technically manufactured in 1985. Here's just sort of a quick Google images of what the aircraft could have looked like. These are Cessnas, but these should not be confused with the typical 172 you would see at flight school. Cessna also manufactures business jets, for those who aren't familiar. Again, certified in 1991, and it crashed into military housing on approach to Montgomery Gibbs Airport. We do not expect any survivors on the business jet, and so far there are 2 fatalities that have been reported. No fatalities reported on the ground, though injuries are reported on the ground. This plane could have carried 2 pilots and up to 10 passengers. Now, what we know so far is that this aircraft is registered out of Homer, Alaska, to an LLC, Daviator LLC, and it doesn't appear to be a commercial operation, though it could have been. Based on the registration, it's likely it was a Part 91 operation, so not for hire operation, potentially a casual flight back from the New York City area back to San Diego. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because you're flying against the jet stream and you're gonna have to stop for fuel. This type of aircraft has about a 5,000-pound fuel capacity, much like the Phenom 300E. And while I can make it from KMRY to Tampa, Florida without a fuel stop, I can't do the inverse. I can't make it from New York to San Diego without a fuel stop. And so much like the Cessna Citation 2, stopping in Kansas for some cheap fuel is a very common strategy. This flight took off from 11:15 p.m. Eastern Time out of Teterboro. It landed 1:49 a.m. Central Time with a 3-hour and 34-minute flight. And then, after about 40 minutes on the ground to fuel and potentially take a break, there was another 3-hour and 11-minute leg to get to San Diego. Now, if you add that together with aircraft prep time, we're probably looking at least an 8-hour duty period, starting somewhere around 10 p.m. Now, I'm including some prep time for the aircraft as well before taking off out of Teterboro. That is a really late start to your day. To start your job at 10 p.m. and to start an 8-hour shift, essentially, that's a lot. Now, I understand this wasn't a for-hire operation, at least from what we can tell on the registration. It could have been. But it just seems unusual to want to take on an 8-hour gig that late, even if it was for personal purposes. That said, weather at the time was reported misting and a fog at 200. Some local airports were reporting 300 feet of overcast. Basically, with minimums at 200 feet on the ILS and the RNAV for runway 28, you are not making this approach, and you should have an alternate airport in mind. Because if the minimums are at 200, or at minimums are at 250, and you've got mist at 200 and fog at 200, you're not making the landing. Unfortunately, as we'll see in some of the ATC audio, the pilot does not seem to have an alternative airport in mind. And I think this, in addition to fatigue, are some of these holes in the Swiss cheese model that are lining up to create pilot distraction, pilot fatigue, and we end up missing a very critical component of our flight instrumentation. Now, ceilings typically around the Montgomery Airport at this time of night are usually reported between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. Those are your ceilings. So that means as you're coming down from 9,000, 8,000, 7,000, you're going to enter that fog layer at about 3,000 to 2,000, and you're going to stay in it all the way until you're at the airport. Unfortunately, this aircraft did not make it to the airport, and based on media reports on the ground, the aircraft hit power lines on the final approach. We have NOTAMs at the airport that indicate the PAPI and approach lighting system is out of service for runway 28. Now, I've personally gone into runway 28 before, and I want to tell you something about runway 28. It is a shortened runway, and you do not want to go into this when you don't have the most ideal scenario for this size of jet. I personally have diverted away from the shortened 4,600-foot runway and diverted over to the San Diego International Airport, which is about a 20-minute drive away, because I wanted a longer runway, especially in either wet or low IFR conditions. So I've personally been en route to Montgomery Gibbs and diverted. Now, in fairness, the landing fees at the Signature at San Diego International are insane. I mean, just to land there, they're going to charge you like $700. And their fuel charges are absolutely nuts. If you look on the map right now, fuel at Montgomery Gibbs is going to run you about $4.46 for a gallon of jet fuel. And if we go ahead and hide this plate for a moment and look at the San Diego International Airport, which is just below it, you can see they'll charge you a delicious $9.36 per gallon of jet fuel. So even if you want to get the minimum fuel to waive that landing fee, you're still going to get ripped off a lot. So San Diego International is not the most desirable airport to fly into, but it's certainly going to be a safer airport to fly into. And then again, San Diego International could have been fogged out as well at the time. Now, what we know about the Montgomery Gibbs Airport is, again, the PAPI and the approach lighting system was out of service. We know that the pilot was setting up for runway 28 right. It's worth noting there are two runways, 28 right and 28 left. In his CTAF transmission, which we'll hear in just a moment, he actually cuts off which runway he's going to land on, and he only says that he's inbound on runway 28, which in my opinion also suggests that he might not be as familiar with the airport as, well, a pilot hopefully would be going into this, low IFR and at night. On top of that, we see that there are only approaches for runway 28, and in this case, the pilot chose the runway 28 RNAV. A very critical marker on this runway 28 approach right here is watching here, Penny, the final approach fix, which is a 2,500 at or above altitude restriction. And then Palos, which actually occurs just before these obstacles at 554 feet. Now, Palos, we don't actually have a minimum altitude for Palos unless you are using the localizer approach. And the minimum altitude at Palos is 1,380 feet. Now, why is Palos so important in this example? Well, Palos is really important because when we look at Palos on the map and we throw where Palos is onto a visual overlay of the space right here, we can see that Palos is right here, right before these obstacles. We could see on the VFR sort of aerial satellite imagery here that there are these three white triangles indicating obstacles at that 554 level. Now, what are those obstacles? Well, if we remove the plate and we jump back in to see what these obstacles are, what we could find are the following. We could find lighting unknown, tower at 549. Okay, that's not great. What do we have here? Lighting unknown, obstacle at 540, and lighting unknown, obstacle at 540. And then right here, we find, dangling power lines at 422 feet. So this means around this region, we have a lot of power lines that we're going to have to deal with. Now, as long as we follow the approach plate, none of this should be an issue. And again, we should be somewhere around 1,300 around the Palos intersect on the plate, on the approach, which again, you can see right here. At Palos, the localizer recommendation, or the LNAV, is that we're looking at about 1,380 feet above the ground. That's what our altimeter should say. But what did our altimeter actually say at the very last altitude report we got from the ADSB exchange? Well, take a look at it on screen here. We have a report at this latitude and longitude here. which if I type in 32.8021 and then the negative 117, if I type these into Google Maps, we could actually find this is the last altitude report we got, which is just to the right of this school. And if we zoom in closely, what do we have right here? Power line towers that we don't know, at least ForeFlight doesn't report, if there are lights. And this is the last altitude report we had. Now remember, the approach plate said we needed to be at 1,380 feet here. If you used a 3-degree glide slope from 2,500 and calculate a stabilized approach, you should probably be even higher than that. In my opinion, quick math, you should be around 1,500 to 1,600 feet. So really, anywhere between 1,380 and 1,600 would have been a great altitude for here because you would have been around 800 to 1,000 feet above the power lines. You have plenty of time to make your approach to actually get into the airport, which is actually way over here. You still have an entire field and commercial plaza and highway to cover before you actually get to the airport. Unfortunately, that's not where the altitude of this aircraft was. If we look at the ADS-B data, at that very point I showed you on the map, just slightly past the power lines, which isn't always going to be the most perfect reporting, the altitude of the aircraft was 600 feet. 600 feet would only give you 46 feet of clearance from the ForeFlight indicated obstacle caution. The problem though here isn't that the pilot is too low on its own. I also pay attention to this right here. Look at the descent rates. In the last 2 minutes of flight, the pilot is all over the place with his descent rate. We're descending at 1,100 feet per minute, then we're at 563 feet per minute, then we're at negative 1,200 feet per minute, then we're at negative 750 feet per minute, then we're at 1,100 feet per minute, then we're at 750 feet per minute, just before the time of the impact. This is clearly a hand-flown approach, and the pilot, in my opinion, has lost situational awareness of one of the most important things in IMC conditions. And I'm going to tell you one of my tricks when it comes to flying in IMC as a jet pilot. Take a look at this. This is an example of a G1000 glide slope. This is like a video game. In case you're not familiar with aviation, your job is to keep this little diamond right about at that line. That would mean you would be coming down to the runway at a 3-degree glide slope. Perfect. If the diamond is below you, it means your aircraft is slightly above that approach slope. Now, sometimes understanding these glide slopes is a little bit complicated, so what I like to do is just pull up what a glide slope can actually look like, and you can see that on screen right here. This is an example of a glide slope, and the closer you get to the runway, the less of a foot deviation you have with these dots. In other words, that triangle is going to get a lot more sensitive as you get closer to the runway. At approximately the distance where the pilot was, with some basic math, I would argue that the pilot was about 3 to 4 dots off of glide slope. And if you see here, they only chart 2 dots. The reason they only chart 2 dots is because the instruments in your cockpit only give you 2 dots. The entire bar is only plus or minus 2.5 dots. In other words, this triangle would have been way off the glide slope, kind of where this red circle is that I marked, which just wouldn't even be depicted. You'd have like a little sample, a little indication of a hope triangle over there, left, half of the glide slope. So in other words, this was in my opinion, just based on the ADS-B data, what I'm seeing in this sort of erratic descent in some of the last data, which is possible some of that data is wrong, but we know they hit the power lines, so we know they were obviously too low. And based on the altitudes that were reported on the ADS-B data, this looks like a full-scale deflection of the glide slope by a lot. Again, 3 to 4 dots. And, Karen, I call her Cockpit Karen. Cockpit Karen starts yelling at you when you're more than a dot outside. And it depends on how advanced your system is. In the 2021 Phenom 300, Cockpit Karen yells a lot. She's a little overly aggressive, some like to say. But what I'd like for you to hear is keep this data in mind, while at the same time, I want you to listen to some of the cockpit audio. And I hate to say it, but I feel like the pilot was getting a little bit conversational here and was not prepared for this approach. Now, the loss of life is terrible. This is absolutely horrible, and I feel so horrible for anybody involved. But the reason I want to make this is not to point blame or to speculate. It's simply to take the data we have and see if we can learn something. I actually have a little lesson that I like to teach myself when it comes to the glide slope. This may not be the perfect thing to do, but it's a little trick that I teach myself, and I do it on purpose. I like to say, keep the diamond below you. Diamonds are found in Minecraft below you, not above you. The diamonds are never above you. Now, why would I say that? Because if I'm going to approach any GPS or ILS approach in minimum or at minimums in IMC, I'm always going to lean slightly to the upside. I'd rather my aircraft, in other words, above the obstacles, right? Like I'd rather, if here's an obstacle, let's show this. If here's the obstacle, so let's say my hand is the power line tower, would I rather my aircraft be, a little high or kind of be as the prescription is? As the prescription is fine. But it doesn't hurt me to go a smidge high, not a lot. You don't want to be high. Like you want to be on that line. I'm just saying, if you're gonna lean in a direction, a fraction, of a millimeter or whatever, lean up a little. That's my POV, because I can always dunk it in and make up for that tiny little deflection towards the end. That's not a big deal. Accelerate my approach from a 3-degree glide slope to, a 3-2. Like nobody's even gonna feel it, okay? If you're going into Aspen at 4.9, which I've landed as well, a little bit of an adjustment isn't gonna make a difference there. That's just sort of my mental thing, especially when I'm in IMC, to know, keep the diamonds below, just like in Minecraft. Now listen to some of the ATC exchange here. I'm gonna fast forward a bit too. By the way, shout out to this channel here, VAS Aviation, and then you can listen to the whole thing yourself. All right, here we go.
7,000 for 12,000.
All right, that's our accident pilot talking to the approach controllers right now. He's asking, he has an approach request for the RNAV 28. Okay, great. He's clear direct to Nesty. Fine. Here are the approach plates. Big deal. We already went through all of these. Now, this is where they talk. I just wanted to know if you really had any idea of the weather. All right, let's listen to this.
Really had any idea on the weather. I got the Gillespie weather, but as I'm sure you know, sometimes it can be dramatically different between Gillespie and Montgomery.
Let me see what I can find out for you.
Okay, so we got the weather from a nearby airport because the ASOS is out of service at Montgomery.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, according to Gillespie, it's pretty much down to minimum, so I just want to see what I'm in for here.
So the pilot clearly knows we're going to be going down to minimums. And here's what we got at the METAR at Gillespie, which shows us overcast conditions at 200 feet, which isn't great. We can see fog, 200 feet. Ugh. This is below minimums. We need to be at 250. We need to break out at 250.
Here, I've got the Miramar automated weather for 0.
Indefinite ceiling at 200 feet, below minimums. Okay, so we need to talk about an alternate.
Sure, all right. That doesn't sound great, but we'll give it a go.
Not great. I don't love that. If it doesn't sound great and the airport I'm going to doesn't have a weather reporting system that's up and the tower is closed and it's nighttime and I'm really tired, I don't think I want to risk it for the biscuit. All right, we're going to keep moving forward here. Just in case we have to go miss, how does Brownfield look? Okay, closer to the border. The problem with this is, why do we not already have an alternate in mind? At this point, close to the final approach fix, we should already have an alternate airport in mind. Approach control says a little bit better by not much. I'm showing ceilings broken at 300. I'm sorry, not ceilings broken. He corrects himself. Overcast at 300. So not very useful. Okay, fantastic. Again, you could watch this whole thing on their channel. All right, at or above 3,800, cleared RNAV 28 right approach, Montgomery. Great. Report IFR cancellation on the ground. Thanks. Okay, this part's a little eerie. The approach controller now clears the pilot to go to the CTAF, the common frequency, to announce, hey, I'm coming in. I'm 3 miles away. I'm coming to land on 28. There's no controller, so you're self-announcing. It's kind of like screaming into the wind. Here I come, boys and girls. If you're out there, get out my way or let me know, right? All right, so frequency change approved. You're now going from the controllers away to you're on your own, buddy.
Change approved.
Up there, thanks. We'll hopefully not see you, but we might have to.
That's a way of basically saying we might have to go missed, which is climbing back out of there. All right, now listen to what the pilot does next. They're gonna announce their approach, and
traffic citation 666 Delta Sierra, 3 miles final 28.
Okay, notice this. They said 3 mile final 28, but they didn't say which one, 28 left or right. Now they could assume a jet's gonna land on 28 right, but to me, this is an indication of pilot saturation. You're leaving off which runway you're landing on. You're only telling us you're gonna land on one of the two runways.
Traffic citation 666 Delta Sierra, 3 miles final 28.
This is the pilot transmission. 7 transmissions. Click, 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 click. You really only need 6 to turn the lighting, the pilot-controlled lighting on at the airport. Because probably right now, he's in the clouds, he can't see anything, he's hand flying, he's worried about doing, I mean, think about all these things that are going on. Oh man, I'm trying to communicate, I just switched over, I gotta cancel my IFR. It's probably not very bumpy because you're in the fog, but you can't see anything. So you can't see anything, you're like, how far away am I? Guys, I'm about 3 miles out. Oh man, I really gotta pay attention to everything else that's going on here. Okay, I'm about 3 miles out. We need to turn the lights on. Click, 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 click. And what are we not paying attention to this entire time? Glide slope. Now, cockpit Karen usually yells at you at this point. Well, a long time ago. Glide slope. Glide slope, and we'd get a glide slope deviation screaming at us on our screen in front of us, but not every aircraft is equipped with that. Cockpit Karen. Okay, try to go for the lights again. Remember Palos? Palos intersection is in the neighborhood just before the accident power lines, which are right here where my mouse is. Just disappears. If you like this breakdown of what possibly happened today based on the facts that we have available at this time, which is less than 10 hours after the accident, feel free to subscribe to the channel. My heart goes out to the families and those involved.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.